Welcome to the Pencil Bob channel. I hope you enjoy my stories.
I bought my studio condo in California 8 years ago, thinking it was the perfect step into homeownership. It was small, sure, but it was mine. The 25% rental cap the HOA imposed didn't bother me back then. I was single, ambitious, and optimistic. If I ever needed to move, I figured I could sell it or wait my turn on the rental list. Seemed straightforward enough at the time. Fast forward 4 years and life changed quickly. I got married, and not long after, we had our son. That studio, once perfect for a single person, became suffocating for a family of 3. Toys, bottles, and baby gear took over every inch of space. We couldn't even sit at the table without tripping over something. So we added ourselves to the rental waiting list, thinking it wouldn't take long. We'd wait our turn, rent out the condo, and move to something more suitable. But the waiting list didn't budge, not an inch. 4 years of nothing. By the time our son started toddling around, bumping into furniture and walls because there was no room to play, we knew waiting wasn't an option anymore. It was impossible to keep living like this, so we made the hard decision to sell the condo. Life threw us another curveball around the same time. My wife got a job in Seattle. It wasn't just any job either. It was her dream job. It paid well enough to solve some of our financial strain, but not well enough to cover the mortgage on the condo rent in Seattle. Daycare for our son chewed through our budget faster than we could replenish it. Selling the condo became an urgent necessity, and luckily, we found a buyer relatively quickly. Things were looking up, or so we thought. That optimism didn't last long. The first sign of trouble was the Fannie Mae questionnaire. The buyer's lender required it, a standard process, nothing unusual. But the HOA management company wouldn't answer it. Days turned into weeks, then into over a month. And despite our constant follow-ups, their silence was deafening. I don't know if they were lazy, incompetent, or both, but their inaction cost us dearly. The buyer couldn't secure a loan without the questionnaire. They tried looking into alternative loans. But that's when we discovered the real bombshell. Our building had become unwarrantable. Apparently, somewhere in the last 2 years, the HOA's finances or policies had slipped into a category that made lenders run for the hills. This was news to me. No one had informed the homeowners, and now I was stuck owning a unit in a building no bank wanted to touch. When the buyer backed out, I felt like the ground had been yanked out from under us. We'd spent months working with this person, getting everything in place, only to lose it all because the HOA couldn't be bothered to send a few forms. It felt personal, even though I knew it wasn't. It felt like they'd deliberately sabotaged us. We tried everything. I called other lenders, searched for creative financing options, and even begged the HOA to cooperate. Nothing worked. The buyer eventually walked away for good, leaving us scrambling for a solution. Meanwhile, the condo sat empty, racking up mortgage payments we couldn't afford. Our savings drained faster than I ever thought possible. We were paying for a place we couldn't live in, couldn't rent, and now couldn't sell. Seattle's rent wasn't cheap. Daycare added another mountain of costs, and we were sinking fast. The stress on my family was crushing. My wife started talking about quitting her job, her dream job, because at least then we could move back to the studio and avoid living in our car. That studio that couldn't even fit the 3 of us, let alone a second child if we ever wanted one. The arguments got worse. Every conversation circled back to the same impossible questions. What do we do? How did we end up like this? Who the hell runs an HOA this poorly? And let's not forget that rental waiting list. I called to check on our position after 4 years of waiting, hoping for a miracle. We hadn't moved up a single spot. Not one. It felt like some kind of cruel joke. The management company wouldn't answer why, just that the list was long and the caps were firm. I started reaching out to attorneys, hoping someone could help. Most didn't even bother to return my calls. The few who did basically shrugged, saying that HOA rental caps and management decisions, while inconvenient, were rarely illegal. One lawyer offered to send a demand letter to the HOA for a hefty fee, but even they admitted it probably wouldn't do much. My frustration boiled over into rage every time I wrote that HOA dues check. They had the audacity to take my money every month while making my life a living hell. I owned the place, paid my property taxes, and yet I had zero control. I couldn't rent it. I couldn't sell it. I couldn't even move back without dismantling my wife's career and uprooting our family. At one point, I thought about just walking away, let the bank take it. But then I'd be stuck with a ruined credit score. And for what? Because an HOA decided it didn't feel like doing its job? The only glimmer of hope came when the buyer, still interested despite everything, mentioned assuming the mortgage. It was a long shot, but it was something. My 2.6% interest rate was like gold compared to the 7% rates everyone else was dealing with. If we could get the bank to approve the assumption, he'd pay less every month than if he bought outright. I clung to that idea like a lifeline. I called my bank immediately, started the process, and prayed it would work. But even then, I couldn't shake the sinking feeling that the HOA would find a way to sabotage it. They'd already proven how little they cared about the people who lived or tried to live in their building. Each day that passed felt heavier than the last. My wife and I started making contingency plans we never thought we'd have to consider. Living in our car was on the table. Moving back to the studio was on the table. Selling everything we owned just to keep afloat was on the table. The condo sat there, an empty shell of everything we'd hoped it would be. It should have been a stepping stone to something better, but instead it became an anchor dragging us down. And all because of an HOA that seemed more interested in gatekeeping than actually managing anything. People always say owning property is a smart investment. For me, it feels like a trap, and as much as I hate to admit it, I don't see a way out. Do you mean Fannie Mae or FHA? The FHA approval is a nightmare. Fannie Mae is used by most people. Also, check if rental caps are allowed by state law. When my HOA wanted to add a rental cap, our lawyer said it needed 100% approval from the owners, not the usual 51%. See how yours was passed. Reading the docs is a pain, but it's really where the answer lies. I'm also in the Seattle area if you need to vent. Consult with a lawyer. The actions and this response make me think they are hiding problematic things. I would not be surprised if HOA is probably way over the 25% rental cap, and the HOA board members are likely directly benefiting from it. There might be worse things going on. These are pretty simple and standard forms. They are not only refusing this, but spent money on the HOA lawyer to shield them on this. That is a big sign of problems to me. The association has no obligation to ensure that the building is approved by Fannie Mae. Broker here. Lol, this is just silly. It also leads me to believe that they don't want anyone poking around their complex, especially someone who has a contractual obligation to inform everyone of the defects they might find. Sue them for performance, then for damages. While you are at it, you could share your experience with other owners of the property who might be selling soon. Because if you own a condo that you can't rent or sell, it's not worth anything.
If you like our stories, then please like and subscribe and comment, and remember to hit that bell icon so you never miss out. We have new stories almost every day.
The mobile home park where I live doesn't technically have a homeowners association, but what we do have might be worse. It's a property management company that oversees the ground rent and common areas, and they've made it their mission to micromanage every single thing we do. Back when the old company ran things, life was tolerable. They left us alone for the most part. But then, a new company swept in from Southern California, bringing with it a whirlwind of chaos, ridiculous rules, and a woman whose sole purpose in life seems to be making mine miserable. It all started shortly after they took over. November rolled in, and with it came an announcement stuffed into everyone's mailboxes. It was cold and demanding, with no room for negotiation. Every home had to be power washed within 10 days, or else. There wasn't even a polite suggestion, just a deadline and a thinly veiled threat of fines. Now, I knew my home needed a good cleaning. I wasn't blind to the streaks and grime, but I had planned to take care of it in the spring when the weather was better. Apparently, that wasn't good enough for our new overlords. I picked up the phone, dialing their office to explain my reasoning, hoping for some understanding. Instead, I got the office manager, who I'll call Karen, because of course her name was Karen. Karen's tone was sharp from the start, like she had been waiting all day for someone to argue with. "The houses be power washed in 10 days, she barked, as though she was personally offended by the dirt on my siding. "Yes, I understand," I replied, trying to keep my voice calm, "but it's November. I was planning to do this in the spring when the weather warms up," she huffed, clearly irritated that I wasn't falling in line. "That's not acceptable. If it's not done in 10 days, you'll face a fine. Do you want the number to a power washing company?" The way she said it made my skin crawl. "Which company?" I asked, already suspicious. "My husband's company," she said, completely unbothered by the conflict of interest. I felt my jaw tighten. "No, thank you. I'll handle it myself." And I did. We went out and bought a power washer that same day just to spite her. It cost more than hiring someone would have, but I'd rather burn my money than give a single cent to Karen's husband. We spent an entire weekend out in the freezing cold, blasting grime off the siding while I muttered curses under my breath about this ridiculous new management. But that was only the beginning. A few months later, Karen came up with a new rule about trash cans. According to her latest decree, all trash cans had to be stored out of sight behind the homes. I didn't think much of it at first because we already kept ours behind the house. But then one day I came home to find a bright orange notice taped to my front door. "Trash cans must be moved," it read in big, bold letters. I stared at it, baffled. Our trash cans were already at the back of the house, exactly where they were supposed to be. I crumpled up the note and tossed it, figuring it was a mistake. But the next day, Karen herself showed up, clipboard in hand, and an air of self-importance radiating off her. "Your trash cans are still visible," she announced, as though she was delivering a court summons. "They're in the back of the house," I replied, confused. "Yes, but they're visible from the street," she said, pointing dramatically toward the cans. I blinked at her. "This the back of the house." "Not from where I'm standing," she snapped. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my temper in check. "What is my address?" I asked, crossing my arms. "Your address is on X Street," she said, looking down at her clipboard as though it gave her some kind of authority. "Exactly," I said. "And the trash cans are behind the house, on Y Street. This the front of my house." She pursed her lips, clearly annoyed that I wasn't bowing to her demands. "Well, they're visible from Y Street, so you need to move them. Where exactly do you suggest I put them?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "No matter where I move them, they're going to be visible from street." Karen stared at me, flustered, like she hadn't thought this through. "That's not my problem," she finally said before storming off. "The trash cans stayed right where they were, and to this day I haven't heard another word about them." But Karen wasn't about to let me off the hook that easily. One summer, she decided to go on a rampage about landscaping. Every yard had to be perfectly maintained, or there would be consequences. Now, I'm not a fan of lawn work, but I do my best to keep things tidy. Apparently, though, it wasn't up to Karen's impossibly high standards. She left another orange notice on my door claiming my grass was too long. The irony, it was the middle of a heat wave, and the grass had practically turned to straw. There was barely anything left to mow. I called the office, once again trying to reason with her. "The grass isn't even growing right now," I pointed out. "That's no excuse," she snapped. "It needs to be mowed weekly." "Are you seriously suggesting I mow dead grass?" Her tone grew even icier. "If you don't, you'll be fined." At that point I was convinced she was doing this on purpose, targeting me because I had dared to push back on her earlier rules. So I grabbed my mower and made a show of it, pushing it back and forth over the brittle remains of my lawn while glaring in the direction of the office. I wouldn't have been surprised if Karen was watching through binoculars, just waiting to pounce on some imaginary infraction. And then there was the time she tried to fine me for having unauthorized decorations in my yard. The decorations in question, a bird feeder and a garden gnome. Apparently, Karen had taken it upon herself to declare anything unsightly as a violation. I argued with her for weeks, refusing to remove them, until she finally gave up. Living here has turned into a never-ending battle of wills. Karen and her company have created rules so arbitrary and absurd that I sometimes wonder if they're just making them up as they go along. Every time I think I've managed to comply with their demands, they find something else to nitpick. But I refuse to let her win. The trash cans are still in the same spot, the bird feeder and gnome are still in the yard, and I've made it my mission to push back on every ridiculous rule she tries to enforce. I don't know how much longer we'll stay here. The constant battles are exhausting, and the idea of dealing with Karen for another year makes my blood boil. But for now, this is home, and I'm not about to let her ruin it. A new company purchased the property a few years ago. Not an HOA, but it's been happening around the country. They are going to start enforcing rules and forcing people out too. They know most can't afford to move the trailer, so they can charge more, or you move out and they keep the trailers and rent it out for more after they take possession from a lien. Sorry for the situation, but maybe knowing about it will help. They have more power because they own the land under the trailers. They can use the eviction process to get the tenant off property, and unless they have the means and location to move the trailer, they will lose that too. Reply: wrong. In a trailer park, the residents only own the home itself. The land it sits on is owned by the person or corporate entity that owns the park. Residents only pay lot rent, but are expected to do upkeep of their lot, or pay more for the owner or their management company to take care of it for them. If a homeowner abandons their home in the park, stops paying rent, and has no way to move it, then the property owner can put a lien against it and end up as the owner eventually. It's a very similar process that HOAs used to steal homes, just on a smaller scale and in some states through the DMV, since they have to provide a license to move said home, and are who you pay your property taxes through as a homeowner. In the case of it being considered as an abandoned vehicle trailer under the purview of the DMV, it's a much faster process than foreclosing on a regular house and land. Source: my family used to own a mobile home park. We took possession of a few abandoned trailers over the 20 years we owned the park. All of it was handled through the DMV in that state. I can't imagine lot rent alone being $300 a month unless that includes city water and sewage bills. Then again, I've been out of the industry for nearly 20 years, and we owned in a very economically depressed area. Didn't try to gouge our residents on rents, just enough to pay bills for the park and make some actual small profit for our family. Hell, I'm pretty sure in the early the nicest double-wide we owned was renting for around $350 a month, and lots were $65 or $70 for homeowners.
I would like to thank you for watching the video to the end. To encourage us to make more videos, please like, subscribe, comment, as well as share. Check out this other video if you haven't already.